Michael left the office with the biggest smile of his life. He drove straight to St. Luke's Medical Center, where his son had just been born. In his mind, images from the past 9 months flooded in, painting the nursery, choosing names, buying the little teddy bear with the blue bow tie. Today, it would all become real. But right outside the delivery room, his mother-in-law, Margaret, stood blocking the way. Her eyes were red. "Michael, don't go in." 3 words, short, enough to make his heart sink. He frowned. "What's going on?" She shook her head. "Please, just wait a moment." "No." Michael brushed past her hand and pushed the door open. Sunlight streamed in through the window. Amanda lay in bed, cradling a tiny newborn in her arms. One glance, and Michael understood everything. The baby's skin was brown. There was no way it was his child. And in that instant he realized, if he didn't act within the next 24 hours, his name would be permanently written on the birth certificate of another man's child. His life would be over. Michael Harris, 38, had built his life on stability, discipline, and integrity. A senior investment manager at Baker & Company Investments, he was known in the office for his steady hand under pressure and his loyalty to those he cared about. Outside of work, he was the man who never missed anniversaries, who always brought flowers just because, and who spent weekends fixing little things around the house without being asked. His marriage to Amanda had been, in his eyes, a partnership built on love and mutual respect. They had been trying for a child for years, enduring fertility treatments, endless doctor visits, and the quiet heartbreak of disappointment month after month. When Amanda announced she was pregnant, Michael believed it was the answer to years of prayers. He threw himself into preparing for fatherhood, researching the safest cribs, reading every book on parenting he could find, and spending hours painting the nursery a soft yellow Amanda had chosen. He imagined teaching his son to throw a baseball, riding bikes together on Saturday mornings, and one day giving him the advice his own father had once given him. To Michael, becoming a father wasn't just a role. It was the next chapter of the life he had worked so hard to build. And as he stood in that delivery room, those dreams began to fracture. In the months leading up to the birth, Michael had carried a quiet, constant joy. Every small moment felt like a milestone. He still remembered the Saturday afternoon they painted the nursery, Amanda teasing him for being too precise with the corners, a smudge of yellow paint streaking her cheek as she laughed. He'd stepped back, brush in hand, imagining the day their baby would sleep peacefully in that very room. There were late-night ice cream runs when Amanda craved chocolate fudge, mornings spent at prenatal classes where he practiced swaddling dolls until it felt natural, and evenings when they sat side by side, debating baby names. Amanda wanted the gender to be a surprise. Like Christmas morning, she had said, her green eyes shining with excitement. Michael had agreed, enjoying the mystery, already picturing the moment the doctor would announce, "It's a boy," or "It's a girl." Every part of his life began to revolve around the baby. Even at work, a framed ultrasound sat on his desk, a reminder of what truly mattered. He thought he knew what awaited him at the hospital, a perfect ending to a long journey. He had no idea that journey was about to collapse in a single breath. The text from Amanda had arrived at 2:47 p.m., right in the middle of reviewing a quarterly report. Michael didn't even think twice. He grabbed his phone, stood up, and strode straight to his colleague David Miller's office. "The baby's here. I've got to go," he said, barely containing the rush of excitement in his voice. David looked up from his computer, grinning. "Then what are you still doing here? Go meet your kid." Michael was already halfway out the door, slipping his suit jacket on. "Cover for me with Davidson?" "Consider it done. Now get out of here, Dad." The word Dad sent a surge of warmth through him. He'd been Amanda's husband for 5 years, but father, that was new, sacred. In the elevator, he loosened his blue silk tie, the one Amanda had given him for their anniversary. The memory of that evening came back easily. Dinner by candlelight, laughter, and the conversation about baby names that had stretched late into the night. The elevator doors opened to the parking garage, and Michael's steps quickened. Today wasn't just another Thursday. Today, he thought, would be the start of everything he'd been waiting for. Michael slid into the driver's seat, his pulse quickening. On the passenger seat, the cream-colored teddy bear with the tiny blue bow tie sat ready, just as it had for weeks. He had bought it during a lunch break, imagining placing it in the crib on the very first night home. As he pulled out of the parking garage, the late afternoon sun bathed the streets in gold. Traffic was surprisingly light for a Thursday. Each green light felt like a blessing, pushing him closer to the moment he would meet his child. 17 minutes. He counted every one of them. The route to St. Luke's Medical Center was familiar. He'd driven it for every checkup, every ultrasound. But this trip was different. This was the one that would change his life. At a red light, his gaze flicked to the teddy bear again, and he smiled. He thought of the nights Amanda had fallen asleep on the couch, his hand resting gently on her pregnant belly. He had felt every kick, every turn, every small reminder that something precious was growing inside her. By the time the hospital came into view, Michael's chest was tight, not from nerves, but from the weight of joy about to spill over. Michael turned into the hospital parking lot, spotting a space close to the main entrance. He eased the car in, shut off the engine, and reached for the teddy bear. As he did, his phone buzzed again. It was a text from Margaret, his mother-in-law. "Are you almost here?" Something about it caught him off guard. No exclamation points, no congratulations, no joy at all, just a flat, direct question. For a woman who loved to gush over every milestone, it felt off. He frowned, brushing it aside. Maybe she was just tired from a long night at the hospital. Margaret was known for her no-nonsense tone, even in good moments. "Just parked," he replied, tucking the phone into his jacket pocket. As he stepped out of the car, a warm breeze carried the faint scent of blooming dogwoods from the hospital garden. It should have been calming, but instead, a thin thread of unease began to weave through his excitement. Michael quickened his pace toward the sliding glass doors, determined to see his wife and child. Whatever was on Margaret's mind could wait until after he held his baby for the first time. The sliding doors parted with a soft whoosh, releasing a rush of cool, conditioned air. Michael strode through the bustling lobby, past clusters of visitors carrying flowers and balloons, toward the elevator that would take him to the maternity ward. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, the noise faded. The hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and fresh flowers. His shoes squeaked against the polished floor as he followed the signs to room 412. Then he saw her, Margaret, standing just outside the door like a sentry. Her navy blue dress seemed sharper than usual, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. When she spotted him, her expression flickered, something between fear and guilt, before she stepped forward, blocking his path. "Michael," she said softly, but there was an edge to her voice. "I think you should wait out here for a moment." He slowed, confusion knitting his brow. "What? Why?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's complicated. Just give me a few minutes to talk to Amanda first." The unease he'd felt earlier tightened into something heavier, but waiting was the last thing on his mind. Michael's grip tightened on the teddy bear. "Is something wrong with the baby? With Amanda?" His voice carried a sharper edge now, a mix of fear and irritation. Margaret hesitated. Her eyes darted toward the door, then back to him. "Please, Michael. Just listen to me." He shook his head, the thump of his heartbeat loud in his ears. "That's my wife and my child in there. I'm not waiting in the hallway." She reached out, pressing a firm hand against his chest. He could feel a faint tremor in her touch. "I'm trying to protect you both," she whispered, but her words only fueled his confusion. "Protect us from what?" His patience was evaporating. Margaret opened her mouth, but no answer came. That was it. Michael brushed her hand aside, his voice low and resolute. "Move." Her face paled as he stepped forward. The teddy bear slipped from his grasp, hitting the floor with a soft thud. His hand found the doorknob. Whatever waited inside, he needed to see it for himself, and no one, not even Margaret, was going to stop him. The door swung open, and a flood of warm afternoon sunlight spilled into the hallway. Michael stepped inside, his pulse hammering in his ears. The room looked exactly as he had imagined for months. Soft light, flowers on the windowsill, the steady beep of hospital monitors. Amanda lay in the bed, her chestnut hair damp with sweat, pulled back into a loose ponytail. She looked tired, but there was still a glow to her, the kind he had pictured in countless daydreams. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in white hospital blankets. For a heartbeat, Michael's chest swelled with the joy he'd been holding in for months. This was the moment. This was fatherhood. He took a step forward. Amanda's eyes lifted to meet his, and something in her expression shifted, surprise, then fear. Michael's gaze dropped to the baby's face. The warmth in his chest turned to ice. The child's skin was a warm brown, a stark contrast to the white blanket, to Amanda's fair complexion, to his own, too. Michael froze. In that instant, the truth hit him with the force of a blow. Michael's breath caught in his throat. The air in the room felt heavier, pressing in around him. His mind scrambled for explanations, but each one collapsed under the obvious truth staring back at him. Amanda clutched the baby tighter, her knuckles whitening. "Michael," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. He stepped back, then forward again, as if his body couldn't decide whether to approach or retreat. "Amanda, what is this?" His words were hoarse, unsteady. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I can explain." "Explain?" The word came out like a bitter laugh. The steady beeping of the monitors filled the silence that followed, each sound sharpening the edge of his disbelief. His vision tunneled, focusing only on the infant in her arms, the tiny hands, the soft brown skin that told a story Amanda hadn't. A deep, cold certainty settled over him. Whatever dream he had walked in with was gone. And somewhere beneath the shock, another realization began to take shape. He had less than a day to stop his name from being written beside this child's on a document that would bind him for life. Amanda's lips trembled as tears slipped down her cheeks. "Michael, I made a mistake," she said, her voice cracking. "One terrible mistake." Michael's jaw clenched. "A mistake?" His tone cut like glass. "Forgetting an anniversary is a mistake. Getting the wrong coffee order is a mistake. This," he gestured toward the baby, his hand shaking, "is not a mistake. This is a choice, a series of choices." Amanda rocked the baby gently, as if the motion could soften his anger. "Please, just listen to me. It didn't mean anything. I didn't want this to happen." Michael's eyes narrowed. "Who is he?" Her gaze fell to the child. She didn't answer. Behind him, the door clicked shut. Margaret had stepped inside, her face drawn tight. Michael turned sharply toward her. "You knew." "I only found out when the baby was born," Margaret insisted, but her voice wavered. "I was trying to give her a chance to tell you herself." Michael let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "A chance? To trap me into raising another man's child?" Amanda's tears came harder. "We can still raise him together. Just sign the birth certificate." The words hit him like a slap. Michael stared at Amanda as if she'd just spoken another language. "Sign the birth certificate. You want me to claim a child that isn't mine?" His voice was low, but each word landed with weight. Amanda's chin lifted slightly, desperation flickering in her eyes. "You're my husband. We made vows, in sickness and in health, for better or worse." He took a slow step forward, his expression hardening. "Those vows included faithfulness. Did you forget that part while you were in someone else's bed?" The baby stirred, letting out a small cry, the sound slicing through the tense air. Amanda shushed softly, her gaze never leaving Michael's face. Margaret stepped closer, her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "The hospital needs the paperwork filled out. Legally, as her husband." "I'm not signing anything," Michael cut in, his voice firm, steel beneath the calm. "Not without a DNA test." Amanda's eyes widened. "A DNA test? You'd really do that? To me? To your child?" He shook his head slowly, the anger now cold and controlled. "Look at that baby, Amanda. Really look. We both know the truth, and I'm done pretending otherwise." The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Michael's eyes stayed fixed on Amanda, but his mind was racing, rewinding through months of smiles, shared dinners, whispered plans for the future. Every memory now felt tainted, each one hiding a shadow he hadn't seen before. He thought about the times Amanda had been working late or spending weekends with her sister. How often had those been lies? How many moments had she been with someone else while he believed she was with family? Margaret shifted uncomfortably beside the bed, avoiding his gaze. That was all the confirmation he needed. She knew more than she'd admitted. Michael's voice was quiet now, almost eerily calm. "How long have you been covering for her?" Margaret's eyes flicked up briefly, guilt flashing before she looked away. "I told you I only found out—" "Don't," he said sharply, the word cutting her off. "You've been standing here, ready to hand me a pen, knowing this wasn't my child, knowing I'd be trapped for the rest of my life. Amanda's tears fell harder. It's not like that. I didn't want to lose you. Michael took a step back toward the door. You lost me the second you decided I didn't deserve the truth. Michael's fingers tightened around the doorknob, his chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate breaths. Behind him, Amanda's sobs mingled with the soft, uneven cries of the baby. Margaret murmured something, maybe his name, but he didn't turn around. The teddy bear still lay where it had fallen, its cheerful blue bow tie now feeling like mockery. He stepped past it without a glance. Out in the hallway, the world felt different, quieter, colder. His shoes clicked against the polished floor as he made his way to the elevator, each step heavier than the last. The elderly couple from earlier was stepping out as he approached, still carrying their pink balloon. The woman's smile faltered when she saw his face, but Michael barely noticed. When the doors slid shut, his reflection stared back at him from the mirrored walls. The man who had walked into the hospital minutes ago had been excited, hopeful, ready to embrace fatherhood. The man staring back now was someone else entirely, someone who had just watched his life split in two. By the time the elevator reached the lobby, his mind was no longer on grief. It was on the next step. He needed answers, and he needed proof. The drive home blurred into a haze of city streets and traffic lights he barely noticed. By the time Michael pulled into his driveway, his hands ached from gripping the steering wheel. Inside, the house felt alien. Every corner held memories now soured. The cream-colored couch where they'd watched movies, the kitchen where they'd danced to old songs, the nursery upstairs painted in soft yellow. He loosened his tie and tossed it onto the counter, where it landed beside Amanda's meticulously kept pregnancy calendar. Each week was marked with notes about the baby's development. He stared at it for a long moment, wondering how many of those weeks had been shared with another man. His phone buzzed on the counter, Amanda's name flashing on the screen for the 17th time that day. He let it ring, jaw tightening. Instead, his eyes drifted toward Amanda's home office, a small room filled with the faint scent of her vanilla perfume. On the desk, her laptop sat closed, exactly where she had left it. Michael sat down, flipped it open, and waited for the password prompt. Without hesitation, he typed in their wedding anniversary, 0922. The screen unlocked instantly. Time to see what else she'd been hiding. The laptop hummed to life, its familiar desktop background a cruel reminder of simpler times. A photo from their trip to Cape Cod, both smiling against the backdrop of a sunset. Michael ignored it and opened her email. At first, nothing unusual stood out. Work memos, shopping receipts, messages to friends. Then he saw the drafts folder, 37 unsent emails. He clicked the first one. Carlos, we need to talk about what happens when the baby comes. Michael can't know. It would destroy everything. I think it's best if you keep your distance for a while. Michael will be a wonderful father. We just need to give it time. Michael's chest tightened. He clicked another. I know this isn't fair to you, but please understand. Michael is a good man. He'll raise the baby well. We just have to make sure he doesn't suspect anything. The words burned. Each email was a brick in the wall of deception Amanda had built around him, months in the making. Michael leaned back, staring at the screen, his hands trembling, not from uncertainty, but from the cold, rising certainty that this had never been an accident. She had planned it. All of it. Michael sat frozen for a long moment, the glow of the laptop screen casting sharp shadows across his face. Then he reached for his phone and scrolled to David Miller's number. His friend picked up on the second ring. You home? Yeah, Michael said, his voice low but steady. I found something. You need to see it. 20 minutes later, David was at the door, still in his work suit, his expression tightening as Michael led him into the office. Without a word, Michael turned the laptop toward him and opened the draft folder. David leaned in, scanning the first few lines of the top email. His eyebrows drew together. Jesus. She was planning this for months. Michael nodded once. I need everything copied, every word, every date. This isn't just about betrayal. It's about making sure she can't trap me legally. David reached into his briefcase and pulled out a USB drive. We'll back it all up. Screenshots, attachments, the works. We'll make a timeline. The two men worked in silence, broken only by the soft click of the mouse and the faint hum of the computer. Each saved file was another piece of ammunition, and Michael intended to use every single one. When the last file had been copied, Michael closed the laptop and leaned back, exhaling slowly. "This isn't enough," he said. "I need legal backup. Now." David nodded. "You already know who to call." Michael opened his contacts and tapped the number for James Morrison, a seasoned family law attorney he'd met years ago through a mutual client. The line rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered, "James Morrison's office." "This is Michael Harris. I need to speak with James immediately. It's urgent." "One moment, please." A brief click, then James's familiar baritone came through. "Michael? What's going on?" Michael's words were measured, but the steel beneath them was unmistakable. "My wife just gave birth to another man's child. She tried to get me to sign the birth certificate. I have proof. Emails, timelines, everything. I need to know exactly what to do next." There was a pause, then the sound of papers shifting. "Don't sign anything. Not the birth certificate, not any hospital forms. Document every message, every conversation. I can clear my schedule for the rest of the afternoon. Can you be at my office in an hour?" "I'll be there," Michael said. And for the first time that day, he felt like he was no longer just reacting, he was fighting back. Michael ended the call and set the phone down on the desk. David was watching him closely. "What did he say?" "He's clearing his schedule. I'm going to his office in an hour," Michael replied, his voice steady but edged with tension. "Until then, I document everything." They went back through the emails, checking dates, pulling any related files. Michael began forwarding the drafts to his personal account, creating an off-site backup. Every few minutes his phone buzzed, Amanda again, alternating between texts and calls. David glanced at the screen. "You should save those too. Every word could matter." Michael nodded, opening a new folder on his desktop labeled Evidence. One by one, he dragged in screenshots of the messages. Some were pleading, "Please come back. We can fix this." Others were manipulative. "Think about the baby. Don't make this harder than it has to be." By the time the clock ticked to 45 minutes before his meeting, the folder was filling fast. David broke the silence. "This is going to get ugly, you know." Michael zipped the folder and transferred a copy to the USB drive. "Good. Let's make sure I'm ready for it." David's eyes shifted to Michael's buzzing phone. "Answer it," he said. "Put it on speaker. Record everything." Michael hesitated for a second, then opened the phone's recording app and tapped record before swiping to answer. "What?" His voice was flat, controlled. Amanda's voice came through, hoarse from crying. "Michael, please. You can't just disappear like this. We need to talk. I can explain." "Talk about what?" Michael shot back. "How you cheated on me. How you planned to trick me into raising another man's child. Or maybe you want to explain the lovely emails you sent to Carlos." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "You went through my private things?" "Private?" Michael's laugh was short and cold. "Like your private affair? Your private plan to commit paternity fraud? This isn't privacy, Amanda, it's deception." "I made a mistake." "No," he cut in, his tone like steel. "You made a plan, over months, and I have every word saved." Silence. When Amanda finally spoke, her voice trembled. "The hospital needs the birth certificate file today. Please, Michael, we can still work this out." "The only thing we're working on is a divorce," he said, then ended the call without waiting for a reply. The phone was still warm in Michael's hand when it buzzed again. Another call from Amanda. He let it ring, but the screen lit up with her voicemail a moment later. He pressed play. Her voice was urgent, teetering between pleading and frustration. "Michael, please, you're overreacting. This doesn't have to end our marriage. I love you. We can get past this if you just stop being so stubborn. Think about the baby. He needs a father." Michael's jaw clenched. He could hear the manipulation threaded through every word. It wasn't about love. It was about keeping him tied to a responsibility that wasn't his. David, sitting across the desk, raised an eyebrow. "She's not going to let up." Michael hit save on the voicemail and dropped it into the evidence folder. "Then neither will I." Another text came through almost immediately. "If you don't sign, you'll regret it." He stared at the words for a beat, then took a screenshot. "Threats now," he muttered, adding the file to the growing stack of proof. The clock on the wall read 15 minutes to his meeting with James Morrison. It was time to stop collecting evidence and start using it. Michael stood, sliding the USB drive into his pocket. "I'm done talking to her," he said, his tone flat. "From now on, everything goes through my lawyer." As if on cue, his phone buzzed again, this time a text, longer than the rest. "Michael, please, we can make this work. You don't have to love him right away. Just sign the birth certificate and we'll figure it out. We're still a family." The audacity made his chest tighten, not with sadness, but with resolve. His thumbs hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he typed his reply. "Put Carlos's name on it." Almost immediately, 3 dots pulsed on the screen. Then her answer came. "He won't. He doesn't want to be involved." Michael's response was instant. "Not my problem. You made your choice. Now live with it." David glanced over his shoulder, catching the exchange. "You're not leaving her any room to twist this." "Exactly," Michael said, slipping his phone into his jacket. "No room, no loopholes, no second chances." The matter, at least in his mind, was settled. But he knew the real fight was just beginning. The next few days passed like a slow burn. Michael avoided the hospital entirely, letting James handle all communication. Every morning brought new messages from Amanda, some pleading, others laced with anger. "Please just talk to me. You're being unreasonable. Think about what you're throwing away. You'll regret this." Each one went straight into the evidence folder. At night, Michael found himself pacing his apartment, replaying the scene in the delivery room over and over. The look in Amanda's eyes, the way Margaret tried to block the door, the instant he saw the truth in the baby's face. David dropped by often, bringing takeout and a brief distraction from the waiting. They talked about sports, work, anything but the looming test results, though it was always there, hovering at the edge of every conversation. When the call finally came from James's office, Michael answered before the first ring had finished. The attorney's voice was calm, steady. "We have the results. Can you come in today?" Michael's stomach tightened. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. One way or another, this would settle the question forever. James's office smelled faintly of leather and old books, the kind of place that carried quiet authority. Michael sat across from the attorney, hands clasped, as James slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "Definitive," James said. 0% probability of paternity. Michael scanned the page, his eyes locking on the numbers. There it was in black and white, the proof he had known in his gut since the moment he stepped into that hospital room. Before the relief could settle, James's tone shifted. "But there's more. Yesterday, Amanda filed the birth certificate. She listed you as the father." Michael's jaw tightened. "She did it after the results?" "Yes. Which means we now have attempted paternity fraud on record. That strengthens our position significantly." For a moment, Michael simply stared at the paper between them. The audacity of it, the deliberate nature. Amanda had crossed a line she could never uncross. "Then we move forward," he said finally. "File everything. The fraud complaint, the divorce, whatever it takes to make sure she faces the consequences." James nodded, pulling a legal pad closer. "We'll make it official today." Michael leaned back, the tension in his shoulders hardening into resolve. The fight was no longer just about clearing his name. It was about justice. James wasted no time. "We'll file the divorce petition with the fraud complaint attached. The DNA test, the emails, the text threats. You have a solid case. But be ready, Michael. She'll fight this." Michael leaned forward. "Let her. I'm done being quiet." The attorney outlined the next steps: subpoenas for hospital records, securing sworn statements from staff who'd witnessed Amanda's attempt to file the birth certificate, and cataloging every piece of digital evidence. As they spoke, Michael's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen. Another message from Amanda. "You can't just walk away from your family." He didn't reply, simply slid the phone face down on the desk. "We'll also prepare for the emotional defense," James continued. "Her lawyer will try to paint this as a moment of panic or desperation. We'll counter with proof of premeditation, dates, timelines, direct quotes from her emails." Michael nodded, his expression unreadable. "She's had months to plan her lies. I've had weeks to gather the truth. Let's see whose story holds up in front of a judge." By the time he left James's office, the paperwork was already in motion. The date for their first court appearance was set. The battle was no longer just brewing. It was officially on the calendar. The morning air in downtown Atlanta carried a crisp bite, matching the cold determination in Michael's chest. Fulton County Courthouse loomed ahead, its granite steps bathed in the pale September light. He adjusted the knot of his navy blue tie, a new one bought after he'd thrown away every gift Amanda had ever given him. The faint murmur of traffic and the distant clang of a streetcar bell filled the silence. A black BMW pulled up to the curb. David stepped out, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, his expression all business. "Thought you might want backup," he said, falling into step beside Michael. "Appreciate it," Michael replied, eyes fixed on the courthouse entrance. James Morrison was already waiting at the top of the steps, silver hair catching the light. He descended to meet them, leather briefcase in hand. "They're already inside," he said. "Amanda arrived with her lawyer and her mother about 15 minutes ago." "What about Carlos?" Michael asked, his voice tightening. James shook his head. "No sign. My sources say he left the state last month. Moved to Nevada." "Coward," David muttered. "Better for us," James said. "His absence makes the abandonment angle stronger." Together they climbed the courthouse steps. Today there would be no running from the truth. Inside, the courthouse air was cooler, tinged with the faint scent of polished wood and paper. The echo of their footsteps followed them down the marble hallway to courtroom 3. When they entered, Michael's eyes found her immediately. Amanda sat at the defendant's table beside her attorney, Victoria Parker, a sharp-featured woman in a tailored gray suit. Amanda's hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. Behind her, Margaret sat in the first row, clutching a tissue in both hands. She glanced up when Michael walked in, her face a strained mix of guilt and apprehension. Amanda looked at him for the first time in weeks. For a brief second, something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe regret. But then her gaze dropped to the table. Michael's attention shifted to James, who had already begun organizing the evidence on their table. Neatly stacked email printouts, the DNA report, a thumb drive holding screenshots and audio files. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise." Judge Helen Carter entered, her dark eyes scanning the room with practiced precision. Everyone took their seats, and Michael felt the tension coil tighter inside him. The time for private accusations was over. This was where every lie would be dragged into the light. James rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket as he stepped toward the bench. His voice carried a steady, measured weight that filled the room without rising in volume. "Your Honor, this is a clear and deliberate case of attempted paternity fraud," he began. "The evidence will show that Mrs. Harris engaged in an extramarital affair resulting in pregnancy, and then attempted to deceive my client, Michael Harris, into accepting legal paternity of a child that is not his." He paced slowly, hands clasped behind his back. "We will present DNA test results showing 0% probability of paternity. We will present emails, dozens of them, documenting months of communication between Mrs. Harris and the biological father, Carlos Martinez. These messages are not the words of a woman in panic. They are the words of someone executing a plan." James paused, letting the words settle. "Even after receiving the DNA results, Mrs. Harris filed a birth certificate listing my client as the father. This was not a momentary lapse of judgment. It was an intentional act of fraud with potential consequences lasting decades." He turned slightly, gesturing toward Michael. "Mr. Harris came to the hospital that day expecting to meet his child. Instead, he found himself staring into the face of a betrayal so calculated it left him no choice but to seek justice here, before this court." Then James stepped back, returning to his seat, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Victoria Parker stood, her movements precise, her tone warm but controlled. She stepped toward the bench, the faint scent of her floral perfume trailing behind her. "Your Honor," she began, "there is no denying that my client, Amanda Harris, made mistakes, serious ones. But this case is not about malicious intent. It's about fear, desperation, and the human need to hold on to family in a moment of crisis." She placed a hand lightly on Amanda's shoulder before continuing. "Mrs. Harris faced abandonment by the biological father of her child. After years of fertility struggles, months of uncertainty, and carrying this child alone, she was terrified. Terrified of raising a baby without support. Terrified of losing the man she loved." Victoria's gaze moved to the judge, steady and deliberate. "We will show that her actions, while misguided, were born from an emotional breaking point, not from a cold and calculated plan. We will show that she is not a criminal, but a first-time mother who made poor decisions under extreme stress." She let the words settle before stepping back. "At the end of this case, we believe the court will see Amanda Harris for what she is, not a fraudster, but a woman who simply wanted to protect her child and her marriage, even if she chose the wrong way to do it." With that, Victoria returned to her seat, her expression calm, as though she had already planted the seeds of doubt. James rose again. "The plaintiff calls Michael Harris to the stand." Michael stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the witness box. The bailiff approached with a Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," Michael replied, his voice steady. Once seated, James stepped forward. "Mr. Harris, please describe the events of September 12th, the day your wife gave birth." Michael's eyes fixed ahead. "I was at work when I got a text from Amanda saying the baby had been born at St. Luke's Medical Center. I left immediately, drove straight there. When I arrived outside room 412, my mother-in-law, Margaret Thompson, blocked the door and told me not to go in." "And what did you do?" "I pushed past her. This was my wife and, what I believed, my child." James's tone remained calm. "And what did you see when you entered the room?" Michael's voice tightened. "Amanda holding a baby. But the baby's skin was brown. Both Amanda and I are white. There was no possibility the child was mine." "And how did Amanda respond when you confronted her?" "She admitted to an affair but asked me to sign the birth certificate anyway." Michael glanced toward Amanda briefly, then back to James. "That was the moment I knew my life had just changed forever." James picked up a thick folder from the plaintiff's table and approached the witness stand. "Mr. Harris, I'm handing you Exhibit A, printed copies of emails recovered from your wife's computer. Can you tell the court how you obtained these?" Michael took the folder, flipping through the pages without looking directly at Amanda. "The computer was in our home office. We both used it. Same password we've had for years. Our wedding anniversary. I logged in after leaving the hospital and found dozens of drafts addressed to Carlos Martinez, the man she'd had the affair with." James nodded. "Please read the highlighted portion from the email dated June 3rd. Michael cleared his throat and read aloud. "Carlos, we need to talk about what happens when the baby comes. Michael can't know. It would destroy everything. I think it's best if you keep your distance for a while. Michael will be a wonderful father. We just need to give it time." He closed the folder slowly. "This wasn't panic. This was a plan. She was laying the groundwork months before the baby was even born." The courtroom was silent except for the faint rustle of paper as James took the folder back. "Your Honor," James said, "we will provide additional excerpts showing this pattern of premeditation over a period of 6 months." The judge gave a curt nod, her gaze shifting briefly to Amanda, whose eyes had dropped to the table. Victoria Parker rose from her seat, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor as she approached the witness stand. Her expression was calm, but her tone carried an undercurrent of challenge. "Mr. Harris," she began, "in 5 years of marriage, had my client ever given you reason to doubt her before this incident?" Michael met her gaze evenly. "No, she was very good at lying." "Objection," Victoria said quickly. Non-responsive. "Sustained," Judge Carter replied. "Mr. Harris, please limit your answer to the question asked," Victoria continued. "Would you say your marriage was happy prior to this?" "I thought it was," Michael answered. "And when you saw the baby, did you attempt to speak with my client privately before involving others?" "What was there to discuss?" Michael's voice stayed level, but the words were sharp. The truth was in her arms. Victoria tilted her head slightly. "Did you consider counseling? Forgiveness?" Michael leaned forward, his tone hardening. "She didn't just have an affair. She planned for me to raise another man's child. She wrote emails about keeping the truth hidden. Even after a DNA test proved I wasn't the father, she tried to file a birth certificate with my name on it. That's not a mistake. It's a scheme." A murmur rippled through the gallery before Judge Carter called for order. Victoria stepped back, but the set of her jaw suggested she wasn't finished. Victoria Parker returned to the defense table and gave Amanda a brief nod. "The defense calls Amanda Harris." Amanda stood, smoothing her skirt as she walked to the witness stand. Her steps were deliberate, but Michael noticed the way her hands twisted together before she placed one on the Bible. "I do," she said quietly after the oath. then sat, adjusting the microphone in front of her. Victoria's tone softened. "Mrs. Harris, please explain to the court what led to your actions." Amanda drew a shaky breath. "When I found out I was pregnant, I knew there was a chance the baby wasn't Michael's. But I hoped. We'd been trying for years, fertility treatments, endless doctor visits. I thought maybe, just maybe, the timing would work out." "And when you realized the truth?" Victoria prompted. "I panicked," Amanda said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Carlos didn't want anything to do with us. He said his career came first. I thought if Michael never knew, we could still be a family." Her voice cracked. "I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was trying to hold on." From his seat, Michael watched her carefully. The words were fragile, the delivery emotional, but he could still see the same determination in her eyes that had been in those emails. This wasn't the whole story, and he knew James would be ready to tear it apart. James rose slowly, buttoning his jacket as he approached the stand. His tone was polite, but his words carried the precision of a scalpel. "Mrs. Harris, you say you panicked, yet in June, 3 months before the birth, you wrote to Mr. Martinez, 'Once Michael signs the birth certificate, everything will be easier.' Does that sound like panic, or does that sound like a plan?" Amanda shifted in her seat. "I was scared. Scared people don't draft multiple emails over 6 months, do they?" James pressed. "You discussed keeping the affair hidden. You discussed how to manage the birth. You discussed how to manipulate my client into believing the child was his. That's not fear. That's strategy." Amanda's gaze dropped to her lap. "I didn't want to lose him." James leaned forward slightly. "You lost him the moment you decided to lie. And you didn't just lie. You tried to make it legal. Even after DNA results proved zero paternity, you filed a birth certificate with his name. That's a felony, Mrs. Harris." The courtroom was still. Amanda's voice was barely audible. I needed help. Carlos wouldn't be there, I thought." "No," James interrupted firmly. "You didn't think about what was right. You thought about what you could get away with." He returned to his table, leaving Amanda silent under the weight of his words. James stood again. "Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Nurse Rebecca Allen to the stand." A woman in her mid-40s, wearing a neat navy blouse, approached and took the oath. She sat with calm composure, folding her hands on the rail of the witness box. "Miss Allen," James began, "you were on duty in the maternity ward at St. Luke's Medical Center on September 12th? "Yes," she confirmed. "Can you tell the court what you observed regarding Mrs. Harris and the birth certificate?" Rebecca nodded. "The day after the delivery, Mrs. Harris asked for the paperwork to list her husband, Mr. Harris, as the father. I explained that both parents usually sign together. She told me Michael was unavailable and insisted we process it without him." James stepped closer. "Did she present any documentation, such as a DNA test, to support paternity?" "No," Rebecca said. "In fact, when I asked about a test, she became defensive and said it wasn't necessary." "Did she mention that a DNA test had already been done?" Rebecca's brow furrowed. "No, that was never brought up." James let the silence linger. "So to be clear, after a test had proven Mr. Harris was not the father, Mrs. Harris still tried to have his name placed on the birth certificate without his consent?" "That is correct," Rebecca said firmly. A ripple of murmurs moved through the gallery as James returned to his seat, the testimony locking another piece of the fraud in place. James rose once more, this time holding a slim, stapled packet. "Your Honor, the plaintiff submits Exhibit B, official DNA test results conducted by the Georgia State Paternity Lab." Judge Carter gave a curt nod. "Proceed." James approached the witness stand where Michael had resumed his seat. "Mr. Harris, can you identify this document?" Michael took the packet, glancing over the familiar black and white pages. "Yes, these are the DNA test results confirming that I have 0% probability of paternity." James faced the judge. "Your Honor, the numbers speak for themselves. Scientific, irrefutable proof. Yet the day after these results were issued, Mrs. Harris attempted to file a birth certificate naming my client as the father." He placed the document on the evidence table. "This isn't speculation. It's not hearsay. It's fact. And the fact is, even with proof in hand, the defendant moved forward with a deliberate act of fraud." Victoria Parker shifted in her seat but didn't rise to object. The silence in the room was palpable. James let the weight of the evidence linger, then turned to the jury box. "This is the moment the case becomes undeniable. Science has stripped away any doubt, and what remains is intent, clear, documented, and actionable. Michael sat motionless beside him, the paper lying like a final verdict between them. James stood, buttoned his jacket, and stepped into the open space between the tables. His voice was steady, carrying the gravity of weeks of preparation. "Your Honor, what we have here is not an impulsive mistake. It is a deliberate deception, sustained over months and executed with precision." He gestured toward the evidence table. "We've presented the emails, dozens of them, showing Mrs. Harris in direct communication with the biological father, planning to hide the truth from my client. We've shown the testimony of Nurse Allen, who confirmed that even after DNA results proved zero paternity, Mrs. Harris still tried to file a birth certificate with my client's name." James turned slightly, meeting the judge's gaze. "This is not a case of confusion or desperation. This is calculated fraud, designed to bind my client to 18 years of financial and emotional responsibility for a child that is not his." Mrs. Harris's own words, "Once Michael signs the birth certificate, everything will be easier. Leave no room for doubt." He paused, letting the silence press in. "Your Honor, we ask that the court hold Mrs. Harris fully accountable for her actions, to protect not just my client, but every parent who could be trapped by such a scheme." With that, James returned to his seat, the echo of his words lingering in the still air. Victoria Parker rose with measured composure, smoothing the front of her charcoal suit before stepping into the open space. Her tone was calm, almost pleading. "Your Honor," she began, "no one here denies that mistakes were made. My client has admitted them openly in this courtroom before her husband and her family, but I urge the court to see the person behind those mistakes. A first-time mother who found herself abandoned by the child's biological father and facing the collapse of her marriage." She glanced toward Amanda, who sat quietly at the defense table, her eyes red and downcast. "Yes, the emails exist," Victoria continued, "and they paint a picture of poor decisions. But those decisions were made under intense emotional duress, during a pregnancy complicated by years of failed fertility treatments and shattered expectations. She feared raising a child alone. She feared losing the man she loved, and in that fear, she made choices she now deeply regrets." Victoria's voice softened further. "Punishment will not undo what has been done, but understanding, true understanding, may allow both parties to move forward. My client asks not for absolution, but for mercy. Because, Your Honor, while the law must be respected, so too must the humanity of those who falter under the weight of life's hardest moments." With a quiet nod, she returned to her seat, the courtroom settling into heavy silence before the judge's final words. Judge Carter removed her glasses, setting them carefully on the bench. Her gaze swept the courtroom, pausing briefly on Amanda, then on Michael. "Having reviewed the evidence and testimony," she began, her voice firm, "this court finds clear and convincing proof of attempted paternity fraud." She leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Harris, your actions were not the result of temporary panic. The documented emails show months of premeditation. The DNA results prove the child is not Mr. Harris's, and yet you still attempted to file a birth certificate with his name, even after being presented with irrefutable scientific proof." Amanda's shoulders slumped. Margaret reached for her hand, but she didn't take it. "This court orders the following," Judge Carter continued. "A fine of $5,000, 100 hours of community service, and the fraud conviction will remain on your permanent record. Mr. Harris is hereby granted a divorce, and legally established as having no parental rights or obligations toward the child." The gavel struck once, sharp against the wood. Michael exhaled slowly, the tension he'd carried for weeks loosening for the first time. Across the aisle, Amanda crumpled in her seat, tears sliding down her cheeks. It was over. Not won, not lost, simply over. Outside the courthouse, the autumn sunlight spilled across the granite steps, painting everything in a warm gold. Michael stood still for a moment, breathing in the crisp air. David came up beside him, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "It's done," David said quietly. Michael shook his head. "It's not about being done. It's about being free." James joined them, a small stack of final documents in hand. "The paperwork will be processed quickly. You can move on now, Michael. This chapter is closed." He nodded, glancing back at the courthouse doors one last time. He thought about the man who had walked into the hospital weeks ago, smiling, hopeful, ready to be a father, and the man standing here now. The first had been naive. The second had learned, painfully, that truth was worth more than comfort. That night, in his quiet apartment, Michael stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. His phone buzzed with a message from David. "Dinner next week? My treat." Michael smiled faintly. The betrayal would always be part of his story, but it would not define his life. Some lies can be forgiven. Others must be met with resolve. And Michael Harris had chosen resolve.